20 gallon remaining here ought to make me happy, and it does to a certain extent, but it still reminds me we got 30 gallon that ain't here.
That's right. That's $12,000 basically.
Yeah.
Digger Maines was one of the familiar faces that made Moonshiners fun to watch. But things changed when the cameras weren't the main story anymore. His health became a serious concern, and suddenly fans were wondering what was really going on with him. So, what happened to Digger, and how serious did things actually get? And after everything he has been through, is he still making moonshine with Mark Ramsey? Join us as we uncover Digger's health battle, what changed in his life, and where the Moonshiners' star is today. The scene that made everyone panic. The season 13 premiere of Moonshiners started very differently from what fans were used to. Digger sat down with Mark and told him he had received some serious news, didn't know how much time he had left, and wanted to go big before he goes home. Coming from Digger, that was hard to ignore. He had always been the guy with the dry jokes who could talk about dangerous moonshine runs without making a big fuss. So, hearing him suddenly talk about running out of time made it clear that something was seriously wrong. Fans immediately started worrying that Digger was dealing with something life-threatening, and after the episode aired, the internet quickly filled with questions about how sick he really was. But Digger didn't leave people guessing for long. He spoke up himself to explain what was actually happening, and his response was very much the Digger fans had come to know. The morning after that premiere aired, Digger posted directly to Facebook, and he didn't dance around it. He confirmed that yes, he had been diagnosed with something real, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, but he made a point of clarifying that the show had made his situation look more dire than it actually was. In his own words, he wrote that his diagnosis was not terminal, ain't no fun though, and that it would probably just make me miserable until something else kills me. Which honestly is a very Digger way to deliver medical news, and it's worth sitting with for a second because it tells you the gap between what the editing implied and what he was actually going through. And that difference matters, because the episode made it sound like Digger was running out of time. The reality was less dramatic. He was dealing with a long-term condition that could be managed. And once he saw how worried fans had become, he quickly came out and explained what was really going on. Digger had cleared up the biggest misunderstanding, but that still left fans with one obvious question. What did this diagnosis actually mean for his health? And was chronic lymphocytic leukemia really as frightening as that first Moonshiners episode made it sound? The truth about Digger's cancer diagnosis. So let's actually talk about what chronic lymphocytic leukemia is, because that's the part that got flattened into Digger has cancer, and then everyone filled in their own blanks from there. CLL is a cancer of the blood and bone marrow, and it's technically the most common form of leukemia diagnosed in adults, even though in absolute numbers it's still considered rare, with fewer than 200,000 new cases reported in the US each year. The main thing about CLL, unlike the aggressive leukemias everyone immediately panics over, is that it takes its sweet time. People live with it for years, sometimes decades, without the disease ever actually knocking them out. That is the exact point Digger wanted to make about his diagnosis. Nobody is downplaying the fact that cancer is involved. It was just a reality check for everyone treating the situation like a sudden, dramatic countdown. Digger even joked about the diagnosis, saying it was more likely to make his life difficult than suddenly take it away. That seemed to calm a lot of the fear, and fans responded with support, with many simply thanking him for coming out and explaining the situation himself instead of letting the rumors keep growing. And that is the important part of Digger's story. He wasn't getting worse or preparing to leave the show. The episode simply made his condition sound far more urgent than it really was, and Digger had to clear things up himself almost immediately. Once Digger cleared up the health scare, it became easier to understand why fans had been so worried about losing him in the first place. But long before Moonshiners made him famous, how did a funeral home embalmer from Tennessee end up digging through the woods looking for secret still sites? The origin story. Fans had good reason to be shaken by Digger's health news, because by that point, many had been watching him for years. But his life before Moonshiners was just as interesting, and the story of how he ended up making liquor with Mark started long before television cameras ever followed them into the woods. Eric Maines grew up in Newport, Tennessee. By his teens, the nickname Digger already stuck, because the kid spent his free time literally digging out hidden still sites in the woods. That is not a fake television backstory. That is just how the kid operated. At the same time, work meant hanging around his dad's funeral home, where he eventually got licensed as an embalmer. For a huge chunk of his life, the guy ran a literal double existence: solemn days putting bodies to rest, and nights running illegal moonshine. Digger also learned the trade under Marvin "Popcorn" Sutton, the notorious moonshiner whose name every fan of reality TV instantly recognizes. Their partnership lasted over 20 years. Most media narratives label Digger as just an apprentice, but the reality is much different. They operated as full business partners, with Digger straight up helping build the actual stills used for the operation. Nothing builds a lifelong bond quite like conspiring to break federal alcohol laws together deep in the woods. When Popcorn died in 2009, Digger started moving away from illegal moonshining and toward doing things legally. That eventually led to a legitimate business with Mark. But Mark wasn't some co-star the show randomly paired him with for television. The two had already known each other and worked together for years before Moonshiners came along, so what fans saw on screen was a real partnership that existed long before anyone thought to put cameras in the woods. Going legal was a massive pivot, but executing it required someone trusted enough to share the risk. That bond was forged decades before executive producers ever cared about Appalachian stills, raising a simple point. How far back does this whole story actually go? 30 years before the cameras showed up. This is the part people tend to skip past, because the show frames Mark and Digger as this instant, built for TV pairing, and the truth is a lot more grounded than that. These two didn't meet on a casting call. They've been friends for more than 30 years, long before Discovery Channel ever had a reason to know either of their names. And that history is exactly why their chemistry on screen never feels performed the way it sometimes does with other reality show duos. Digger has described the two of them as being like an old married couple, the kind of pairing where you finish each other's sentences without really trying, and he's talked about loving Mark like a brother in a way that goes well past whatever a business partnership normally requires. You can't disguise a good friendship, he's said, and if you've watched them bicker their way through a build, you already know exactly what he means. What's funny is that Digger wasn't even the one who wanted to do the show in the first place. It was Mark who pushed for it, who had his own connection to Popcorn Sutton and got approached when a production company started developing a concept around Appalachian moonshining. Digger, meanwhile, had already stepped away from the illegal side of things by that point and was messing around with home brewing to scratch the itch instead. And, by his own account, he wasn't particularly interested in getting back into it for a camera crew. He's said he only agreed because he figured the show wasn't going to last anyway. "I thought the show was done for," he's explained. "I said, if you want to do it, I'll do it this last season because it's about dead." Mark joined in season 3. Digger followed a season later, mostly, it sounds like, to humor his friend on what he assumed was a doomed project. Obviously, that didn't happen. The show is now well past a decade on the air, and the two of them have become arguably its most recognizable pairing, expanding out into judging roles on the spin-off Master Distiller and appearances on True Crime and Shine, on top of building an actual legal spirits business together. Which means when you watch Digger deliver that leukemia news to Mark in the season 13 premiere, you're not watching two co-stars performing concern for the cameras. You're watching one half of a 30-year friendship tell the other half something that, even in its corrected, non-terminal form, is still genuinely hard to hear. And the health scare wasn't even the only thing that friendship would have to get through. The other thing that happened. And just as the worry around Digger's leukemia was starting to settle down, another problem came along that had nothing to do with his health. This time, Digger and Mark were facing the risk that has followed Moonshiners from the very beginning: getting caught by the law. They had spent years making liquor in the woods, moving equipment around, and trying to stay one step ahead of anyone who might shut the operation down. But after doing it for so long, that danger can almost start to feel like part of the routine. Then came a close call that reminded both men just how quickly things could go wrong. Because getting caught would not mean losing a batch of moonshine or having a bad day at the still. It could mean arrests, charges, and the kind of trouble that follows someone long after the cameras have stopped filming. During season 14, Digger and Mark noticed they were being watched. An unmarked pickup truck kept showing up near where they were working, and it eventually became clear they weren't imagining it. They were under active surveillance by a law enforcement officer named David Robertson, someone who apparently had a history with the pair and had been trying to catch them for a while. By the season 14 finale, things escalated to the point where they were caught with a functioning still, and both men ended up handcuffed in the back of a sheriff's vehicle. Now, if you've watched Moonshiners for any length of time, you know the show has always operated in this strange legal gray zone where everyone involved is committing a crime on camera, and somehow nobody's gone to prison for it. So there's always been a certain amount of skepticism from viewers about how real these run-ins actually are. But this one apparently rattled Digger and Mark enough that they talked about it candidly afterward, and their account doesn't sound like two guys playing up the drama for the cameras. They were released without charges, largely because the still itself had been sabotaged, a hole drilled into it that rendered it non-functional, which gave them an out. But Digger has since said, in an interview with TV Insider, that a real arrest will change your life, and that even being detained without formal charges is just a bad feeling. The kind of thing where you never get fully comfortable again. And Mark echoed that, describing the threat of arrest as something that's always sitting there in the back of your mind, no matter how careful you are. What makes that exchange more interesting than the usual reality TV brush with the law moment is that both men have talked openly about the fact that they've always had legitimate day jobs running alongside the moonshining, jobs that gave them the freedom to keep doing this in the first place. That's not a small detail. It means the risk they were running wasn't a desperate, no other options kind of risk. It was a choice, made repeatedly, by two men who by that point had families, businesses, and a television career that didn't actually require them to keep breaking the law to keep the show interesting. Getting handcuffed clearly forced them to reckon with exactly how much longer they wanted to keep making that particular choice. That combination, a health scare and a genuine legal scare, landing within roughly 2 seasons of each other, is really what fans mean when they ask what happened to Digger. It wasn't one dramatic event. It was 2 separate reckonings arriving close together, one with his body and one with the law he's spent decades quietly ignoring. And what they did next tells you just how seriously they took it. 6 months of silence. After that season 14 finale, Digger and Mark did something they hadn't really done before on the show. They went quiet. They shut down operations for roughly 6 months, which for two guys whose entire public identity is built around distilling illegally in the woods is a pretty significant pause. When they came back for the season 15 premiere in January 2026, it was not with the same swagger. They came back leaner, more cautious, and explicitly said their mindset had shifted toward keeping a low profile, sticking with established customers, and not expanding the way they had been. They even made the decision to send away 2 colleagues who'd been working with them, Amanda Bryant and Kelly Williamson, which reads less like a falling out and more like exactly what it sounds like. 2 men who'd just been handcuffed, deciding that a smaller, quieter operation was the smarter move. Mark put it plainly when he talked about it afterward, saying their ambition and their recent expansion had probably attracted the exact kind of attention they didn't want. That is a pretty big change for anyone who has followed Moonshiners for years, because the show has always made bigger feel better. Bigger stills, bigger batches, and bigger risks usually mean more excitement, so watching Digger and Mark deliberately go in the opposite direction feels different. They have been doing this long enough to know what can happen when things get too big. And after coming so close to serious trouble, scaling back started making more sense than trying to prove anything. It is not the loudest storyline Moonshiners has ever had, but that is probably why it feels so real. 2 of the show's most experienced Moonshiners finally reached a point where staying in the game mattered more than constantly pushing their luck. It also lines up with something Digger said about their work ethic going back years, that both of them had always treated this as something that needed to fit around real responsibilities rather than take them over completely. And a pause like that fits a lot more naturally into that mindset than it would for cast members who've built their entire identity around the danger itself. That pause showed Digger and Mark were already willing to slow things down when the risks started getting too high, rather than letting the show decide how far they should push it. So after the health scare, the close call with the law, and everything else that followed, where does that leave Digger today? Where things actually stand right now? The simple answer to what happened to Digger is actually good news. He is still around and still very much part of Moonshiners. He continues working alongside Mark, and the business they built outside the show is still going too. Their partnership with Sugarland's distilling company has continued, with products such as Mark and Digger's Mountain Legacy Corn Whiskey and Hazelnut Rum carrying their names. So despite the health scare and all the concern about what Digger's diagnosis might mean for his future, his story did not end with him disappearing from television or walking away from the business he spent years building. As recently as this year, the 2 of them have been out doing public appearances together, including serving as grand marshals for American flat-track motorcycle races and promoting Sugarland's newest whiskey release, which is about as far from quietly fading away as a public schedule gets. His leukemia hasn't been reported as having progressed into anything more severe, and there's no indication from him directly that it's changed his day-to-day life beyond whatever ongoing management a chronic condition requires. That near arrest actually shook Digger and Mark up enough to change their entire operation. A fake cancer scare makes a good story for a few episodes. Getting cornered by the law after 30 years of moonshining and 15 seasons on TV hits different. It forced 2 veteran shiners to pull back, lay low, and rethink how they run things from here on out. Nothing like a sudden reality check to make decades of experience look like a lucky streak running out. What fans are still arguing about online is how long that sudden caution actually holds up. Reality TV thrives on stupid risks, which is the exact thing that almost landed Digger and Mark in handcuffs. Scaling back sounds smart on paper, But staying boring on a show running since 2011 is a quick way to get canceled. Sooner or later, the urge to chase views always beats the urge to stay out of jail. That slow-motion train wreck between common sense and screen time is the real show anyway. Turns out 30 seconds of self-preservation rarely survives a reality TV contract. Do you think Digger and Mark can keep this lower-profile approach going? Or is a show like Moonshiners always going to pull them back toward bigger risks? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.